Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. My guest today is consumer behavior expert, author, and professor of marketing, Michael Solomon. Michael literally wrote the book on understanding consumers. Hundreds of thousands of business students have learned about marketing from his books, including Consumer Behavior, Buying, Having, and Being, the most widely used book on the subject in the world. He advises big global clients like Calvin Klein, eBay, Procter & Gamble, BMW, and United Airlines, to name just a few, on marketing strategies to make them more consumer-centric. He regularly appears on television shows, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, and CNN, to comment on consumer issues. And he's often quoted in major media outlets such as the New York Times, USA Today, Adweek, and Time. And as a professor of marketing and an industry consultant, Michael combines cutting-edge academic theory with actionable real-world strategies. He helps managers get inside the heads of their customers so that they can anticipate and satisfy their deepest and most pressing needs today and tomorrow. So this sounds super interesting, and I can't wait to hear more about it. Welcome, Michael, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Hey, Claudia, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm looking forward to our conversation. Michael, what is it about consumer behavior that you found so fascinating that you decided to make this the focus of your work? Did you maybe have any kind of key experiences that made it clear to you that this was going to be the right direction and choice for you?
Yeah, so actually very, very early on, I started to do some work with Levi Strauss on the psychology of blue jeans. And it really opened my eyes because it really showed me the importance that everyday products exert, the impact that they exert on our daily lives, the way we feel about ourselves, the way we evaluate others. And I assumed that would just be the case for really expensive products or luxury products that are very, very important to people, but it's not true. It's everyday products like blue jeans and other things, household products, actually kind of take on a life of their own. People really attach a lot of importance to these things. We have a lot of allegiance to certain brands that we love because they help to express a core part of who we are. And so early in my career, I was trained as a social psychologist, but I realized that, we didn't really know very much about the role that products or brands play in the process of defining who we are. And so my experience with Levi's and then with some other companies as I started to get more involved, in the corporate world, just convinced me over and over again, and I've never seen an example to the contrary, that it's so important, whether you're an entrepreneur or a big company like Levi Strauss, it doesn't matter. You have to remember that what you're selling is a story, not just a product. And that insight, it sounds like it's just common sense, but that insight really was very helpful to me because over the years, what I've discovered is the majority of organizations out there do not understand that. They don't understand that they're not selling a bunch of nuts and bolts. They're selling an idea. They're selling a story. And so it's been a lot of fun over the years to work with companies and to help them to understand that they are not just selling attributes, they're selling benefits. And if
Mm.
you're starting
Mhm.
a business, that's so important because you tend, rightly so, to focus on a lot of the nuts and bolts details in your own life and in getting your business started. But always remember what it is that you're selling. It is not the same thing as what people are buying necessarily.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm looking forward to dig deeper into all of that. But before we do, I'd like to ask you a fun question. If
Okay.
you could go back in time and explore a different path in the decision tree of your life, what alternative career would you pick and why?
Wow. Well, I would probably have gone into advertising if I
Mm.
hadn't become an academic, because I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. And I don't know, maybe I don't know if I would have been able to create the stuff that I study. I'm not that talented, but if I was able to do that, I think it would have been really, really interesting to become an advertising executive.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you would switch from theory to more like practice and the creative side of it.
Yeah, well, I've always had kind of one foot in the academics world and one foot in the business world, and so I always admire the people who have to deliver great results on a deadline, with a budget. And in academia, we have different standards that we use, publish or perish, and all that.
Mhm.
It's also competitive, but it's a very different kind of world. So I think it would be fun to experience that. Yeah.
Maybe you should experiment
Yeah.
experiment with that.
Well, the good thing about having tenure as a university professor is I don't have to do that. uh,
Do you have a favorite motto or a quote that you live by?
yeah, I think it's what I pretty much just said, and that is that we buy things not because of what they do, but because of what they mean.
Mm. Yeah, that's definitely true. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Carl Jung, who said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And actually, I think that's probably super relevant for discussing your area of expertise, which is marketing and consumer behavior, because the decisions we make are, as you said, very much guided by our emotions, by our identity, and by our subconscious beliefs, right?
There's a lot going on beneath the surface. It depends on your perspective. And if you're a Freudian and believe in all that subconscious stuff, whatever it is, there's what we're seeing every day. We learn more and more about the many influences on our behavior that are quite subtle, often not at the conscious level. And some of those have to do with the types of things that you're talking about, that Carl Jung talked about, but also just things that are going on in the environment that influence our behavior. It can be something as simple as the room temperature.
Mm.
If you're
Mhm.
sitting in a room, or if you're in, let's say, in a store that's either too hot or too cold, that right there can influence the shopping experience considerably. And yet we often don't give enough credit to these things that are going on out there in the world. We're not conscious of them. But you're right. The study of consumer behavior to a large degree is trying to bring to the surface the reasons and the processes that people use to make these decisions.
Yeah, what we're seeing is just, or what we are aware of is often just the tip of the iceberg. But maybe we should just take a step back before we get too down in the weeds and start with consumer behavior for dummies. So, for everyone who's not yet familiar with this topic, can you maybe give us a quick
Yeah.
definition of just everything that falls under this umbrella term and how it influences the buying process?
Sure. Well, within the marketing discipline, of course, there's certain specialties like supply chain or promotion or something like that. And so consumer behavior, I guess, is a subset of marketing. But certainly in the academic world, it's a hybrid discipline that is composed of people like me who came from psychology, other kinds of social scientists, sociologists, anthropologists, literary theorists. There are many different people that feed into this study of consumer behavior, which is one of the things that makes it so fascinating, because depending on your background, you approach a phenomenon based on your own mindset and what you've been trained to look for. And so you could have two consumer behavior researchers with different backgrounds studying the same thing and coming up with very different results. But the basic idea is to understand how consumers use information and products and all of the commercial stuff that's out there, not just to live their lives. Obviously, we need products to live our lives, but also to define ourselves and to define relationships with other people. So, for example, some things we do, we study in consumer behavior and involve how do people assimilate all kinds of information about products from the environment, from social media, from store displays, whatever it is. How do they combine all of this information? And by the way, one of the biggest problems we have as consumers today is there's just too much information, and that may be something we want to return to. But how do we absorb that information? What do we not pay attention to? What do we pay attention to? What weight do we give it? How do we interpret it? Believe me, even some of the simplest decisions, buying a container of milk or something, sometimes aren't as simple as you might think, because there's a lot going on beneath the surface, as you were saying. So when we study consumer behavior, it's definitely not removed from the study of marketing, but it's a bit less of a focus on the company and more of a focus on how the product or service is experienced from the point of view of the person who buys it.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I mean, how should consumer behavior guide our marketing strategy? Can you maybe give us an example of a brand that did a great job translating what we know about consumer behavior into a successful marketing strategy, and then maybe contrast that with another example that wasn't successful?
Well, there obviously are a lot of successful brands out there, and and particularly I'm talking mostly about the consumer-facing world, not the B2B world. Although many of these things apply there as well, I can assure you. But essentially, the brands that are successful, and you can point to some of the obvious ones: Nike, Patagonia, Apple. The usual suspects. When you ask yourself, why are they so successful? The answer is yes, of course, they sell great products, but I don't think that's why they're successful. I think they're successful because they're telling a great story.
Mhm.
Nike tells a great story. Apple tells a great story. And so the brands that have figured this out in different verticals are those examples that you're asking for. Usually you'll see in just about every vertical, there will be one or two brands that really dominate that market, and then a bunch of also brands that kind of line up right below it. Those brands that are number one or maybe number two have figured out that people are really, really eager to consume a story. So, as an example, well, the one I mentioned before, Levi Strauss, what a great job they've done over the years of really, well, they didn't create the myth of the rugged miners back in 150 years ago, searching for gold in California, for example, which is where they got their start. But they were smart enough to realize that they should capitalize on those kinds of stories, and and then fast forward, say, to the 1950s with James Dean and movies where or the Hell's Angels, where you would see the Levi's jeans being worn, and then of course fast forward to today, where they're bringing out still more stories. In terms of a negative example, I'm not sure that I want to go there. But well, here's an example for you of a company that had it figured out, and then they decided that they hadn't figured it out at all, or the market decided that, and that would be Sony. A great example would be the Sony Walkman. Many of your listeners don't even know what a Sony Walkman is. Back in the day, we had something called a cassette, and and I'm sure you're way too young to ever remember this, Claudia.
I
But
had one.
okay. But the idea was that they revolutionized the consumption of music by making it personal. Giving you those headphones, and of course, fast forward to today, we're still consuming that, but who is the company that is making the equipment today? It's not Sony. And the reason is, I think that Sony got too complacent because they scored a technical breakthrough when they engineered the Walkman. But then they sat on their laurels and they said, well, we've done this, we've created this new product. Now we can kind of sit back and take it easy and just count the money. Well, what they didn't count on is that over the years, the technology is going to change. And so that core benefit of delivering personalized music that's portable, what a breakthrough that was, is now being, that benefit is still something that we all really, really love. But other companies have stepped in to take advantage of newer technologies that don't require that cumbersome Walkman that you used to have to carry around. And so Sony, I believe, still makes that kind of equipment. But I don't know, when I ask my students, how many of you listen to your music on a Sony player, I get no hands at all. So they should have been where Apple is today. But I think that they focused too much on the technical victory that they accomplished early on, and they lost their focus on what consumers are looking to get out of the technology and how they have to innovate to keep up with that.
Okay, so it's all about staying, keeping the innovation going and adapting to changing conditions and changing technologies. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the benefit might be the same, but the way you deliver it changes, and that's a classic. We call that marketing myopia when a company, like a great example is the railroads of in the 19th century, especially here in the U.S. The railroads dominated the transportation industry and made billionaires out of some people. But what some of them didn't anticipate was that there might be an alternative form of transportation other than railroads that would move all that freight. And when Henry Ford and others came along and invented this thing called the automobile, and then the truck, of course, some of the railroads weren't positioned to keep up with that because they defined their business as the railroad business when in fact they were in the transportation business. And the reason I mention this old story is that I really encourage your listeners to define what it is they're selling, not in terms, again, of the attributes, but of the benefits. What business are you really in? You're not in the, let's say, the cosmetics business. You're in the beauty business. And there's a huge distinction because there could be other ways that people choose to buy products that express aspects of physical beauty that may move on and make eyeliner obsolete someday.
Okay, so always pay attention to alternatives and your competitors.
Yeah, well, and for example, I believe there are people who have tattoos of makeup of eyebrows and so on that get tattooed permanently, and so I guess they no longer need those cosmetics. So there's a modern day example of being sure that you understand the business that you're actually in, and it's not the business that's defined by what you sell. It's the business that's defined by what people are looking to get out of what you sell.
So it's more about the aspiring personality or the benefits they hope to get out of that.
Absolutely.
So what are the most important factors affecting consumer behavior?
Well, have we got a few days to talk about that? That's a pretty open question, but I think that today, well, obviously we've seen enormous changes in consumer behavior the last few years. I should say, a lot of people think it's due to the pandemic, And my response to that is no, the pandemic did not change consumer behavior. What it did was to accelerate changes that were already happening in our society. For example, the trend toward purchasing groceries online rather than going to a store. That was already happening before, but basically the pandemic poured fuel on the fire. So in terms of big changes that we're seeing, there's a lot of changes that have to do with social identity, and maybe we can get into that. Such, for example, gender. A basic category like gender that is being redefined. But I actually think that one of the biggest changes is a negative one, but it's one that we have to be aware of, and that is simply the competition to get the customer's attention. So we are today really overwhelmed by the amount of information that is being put in front of us, most of it visual, but also using our other senses. And, by some estimates, we're exposed to 3,500 to 5,000 commercial messages every single day. Now, obviously, we don't, we can't remember the large majority of those, and that's where the problem is. There is so much competition to get space in our poor little overworked brains that just getting noticed is really the first priority, or it should be, for many businesses. And cutting through that clutter is one of the big challenges to consumer behavior. But obviously, there are others. And again, we are going through some enormous social changes in terms of the way that people define themselves, the dimensions that we use, whether it's gender, ethnicity, age. All of these fundamental dimensions are really coming into question today. I actually wrote an entire book about this, where I refer to consumers today as the new chameleons. We don't change our colors, but we change our social identities, the way we think about ourselves, often many times during the course of a day, depending on the identities that we're being asked to take on. Whether it's a partner or colleague or athlete or entrepreneur, what have you. Each of these identities requires different kinds of products and services for us to be successful. And so one of the big challenges today is as I said, just getting in front of people and showing them that as they're trying on these new identities, guess what? We have a product or service that will help you to do that.
Right. So you have to cater to those different roles that people play throughout the day.
Right. It's not as monolithic as it used to be. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was there was a lot of conformity. Everybody kind of got their marching orders from mass media. And, there were only a few television stations in the US or in the UK, in Europe. We all pretty much got our information from the same place. Now, when obviously today that is definitely not the case. So a huge change that we're seeing is what we call cultural fragmentation, where we start with these fairly large monolithic groups. And by the way, this is the basis for what we call market segmentation. I think most of your listeners know what I mean by that. That was a very useful concept in the last century. It was pioneered by General Motors initially when they created different car divisions based on the recognition that not everybody wants to buy the same car or has the means to buy the same car. And so it became economically viable, especially as mass media got to be very effective, to target these large, fairly homogeneous groups. But that logic doesn't really apply today because those groups are really splintering. And each of us, in a sense, is kind of picking and choosing information from lots of different places. And by the way, creating a lot of that information as well. And so one of the other big changes, in addition to this fragmentation, where we have lots of more little tiny subcultures rather than this big overall culture, the biggest change that I've seen is so-called Internet 2.0. You may know that phrase, and basically that means that the internet and social media have become interactive, and so customers are actually creating content in a volume that is unprecedented. And so today, in many spheres, we see that customers and consumers are actually becoming part of the process. Whether they're driving a car with Uber or going into the whole hotel business by renting out their home to Airbnb, any number of things, posting ideas for new product designs. So much of this consumer content is valuable if you're aware that it's there. So a great example, because you're probably going to ask me for an example of what I mean.
Yeah.
A great example is Lego, very successful toy company, European company. And one of the reasons for their success today, I think, is that they have this network of, I believe it's over 10,000 Lego users who they can call upon for ideas, for the next Lego product. And so when you look at companies that have opened the door, many companies are very reluctant to kind of let us look underneath the kimono, so to speak. What is, to release their product before it's totally perfect, for example. And yet today, what we see is that so much of consumer behavior is collaborative, where product designers are actually working with customers to create products that those customers really want. So I guess to summarize, for me, the biggest change that I've seen in consumer behavior rests on a change of a very simple little word, and that is we've moved from marketing to the customer to marketing with the customer.
Yeah, I love that idea of the co-creation process between the brand and the consumer, because it opens up all those possibilities.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating. So what else can we do as a brand to increase customer engagement with our products and services? Can you maybe share some more tips that our listeners can go and implement straight away?
Yeah. Well, a small plug. I actually recently launched an online course on customer engagement and how to boost it. That's about 6 hours of content. So I won't get into that here. But the course is called Engage. But essentially, there are a number of ways to boost engagement, and one of them is what I've just said, and that is co-creation. We always like to be a part of something. If someone asks our opinion, we tend to be a lot more interested in their decision. So that's definitely one of the things that you can do. But basically, what I talk about in this course is that there are actually 3 different paths to engagement, and those are the product, the message, and the environment in which the product is being purchased. So for each of those, the product itself, there are ways to engage, like the co-design that I've just talked about. Obviously, staying on top of consumer trends and developing products that are syncing with the underlying needs that people are looking for. So, for example, Lululemon has done a wonderful job of that. By recognizing this need for wellness and calm and meditation and all of that, and now you can spend a lot of money to buy a pair of nice Lululemon yoga pants that will help you to do that. And but that's a great example where they were where they had to be in terms of where the society was going. So staying on top of things in the product world, and again, there's lots more I could say about that. The message, the way that you communicate about the product, again, breaking through that communication tsunami that is engulfing all of us. There are kind of tricks of the trade in terms of devising a message that will help you to stand out from the crowd. And then finally, that environmental piece, which, as I said before, tends to get neglected, but is hugely important. And so we see that even very subtle tweaks in the environment or at retail, for example, the way a store is designed, the design elements that we use to create a certain emotional response over and above what you're selling in the store can make a huge difference. So there's lots of different ways to boost engagement. There's no single correct answer. Obviously, it depends on your situation, but you have to recognize that it's very likely that if you don't do these things, and if you only sell your product, in a traditional way, people will not get engaged with that, because we don't get engaged with functionality. We get engaged with how that functionality changes our lives. So obviously, the first question a customer always asks is, what's in it for me? It's not about what's going to make that company happy if I buy their product. What is in it for me? How are they making my life better? So as you think about engagement, at least in the abstract sense, think about what is the project that your customers are working toward, where your product or service can make a difference. And by showing them that, basically, and I tell my students, 80 to 90% of advertising follows a very simple formula, but it's really profound. And that is, we start with, here we are now. Here I am now. This is who I am now. This is who I want to be, whether it's professional success or, marrying the most beautiful person you've ever met, or, whatever the project is. This is where I want to be. And the product becomes the bridge that gets you from A to B, from where I am now to where I want to be. If you can position your offering so that it offers that bridging function, that is going to sell the product for you. Again, it's not about the functionality. It's showing people that by choosing this solution, you're going to move from where you are now to where you want to be.
Yeah, that's so true. You talked about creating a customer experience like in store, but there you have so many more options just to design the experience that you don't really have online. So how are those two things different?
Well, of course, the technology is changing every day, and this assumption that you can't have a great experience online, or as good a one as you do in store, is I don't think that's quite valid anymore. By the way, I'm a big fan of the in-store experience, so I don't want to see that go away anytime soon. I don't think it will. But there are certainly things that you can do online that will engage people as well. One of them is importing a community. When you go to a store, a bricks and mortar store, maybe you have a community because you're bringing two of your friends with you for their input. But of course, online, one of the biggest, and there's this Internet 2.0 again. One of the biggest developments is that we're more likely to learn about products from other users than we are from the manufacturer or creator of the product. So this has led to what I call the horizontal revolution, where much of our information is not coming top down from the companies, but rather horizontally from other people, other peers, other users in the system. So creating those communities online or encouraging them is one thing that you can do. But there are also, I talked about these new technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality. These are things, these are platforms that, and of course, everybody's talking about the metaverse these days. I'm not sure what will happen with that, but that's a recognition that really so much of our existence over the coming years is going to be a hybrid between offline and online. So it's really, I think, kind of a strategic mistake to say, are we offline or are we online? The answer is, to be successful today, you have to be both. You have to be where your customer is, and your customer is making a multi-channel journey through the process. Some of the things they're looking at are offline, some are online. And it's no longer this simple dichotomy, just like those other dichotomies I mentioned are changing, gender, ethnicity, age, and so on. You're no longer either young or old. You're no longer male or female. A lot of these things are changing. And that online, offline dichotomy is one that is largely going away. So most of us, certainly when my students are in class pretending to listen to me lecture, but they're actually checking their Instagram feed, they're both online and offline, and that's the way things are going to be moving forward.
Right. Are there any other trends that you predict for, say, the next 10 years?
Well, I guess, one of them is personalization. What we see, especially among young people, is the desire for very personalized experiences and suggestions. And these are kids who have grown up getting that kind of personalized information that we didn't have access to, those of us who are older. And so they expect that they're going to have an immediate experience, no delay of gratification, but a personalized experience as well. In surveys, young people say that when a company contacts them, they assume that company already knows who they are and what they want. So no more of this kind of very broad, generic kind of appeal. Each of us is becoming a market of one. So that old concept of market segmentation, which, by the way, we still teach, and mea culpa, I still teach it to my students, but it's largely moving away from that mass homogeneous approach to a very one-on-one personalized approach where every customer is conceivably getting a unique message and possibly buying a unique product that is configured based on their preferences.
So do you think we're moving away from all the automation we have seen in marketing over the last few years?
No, I don't think we're moving away from it. I think we're moving toward more sophisticated automation that recognizes, customer relationship management databases and so on, CRM, that recognize the history of each customer that you're interacting with, and therefore is able to automatically tailor the message or the product to that person. So we actually, in order to move toward this goal of markets of one, we need more automation, not less, but it has to have a human dimension to it. It can't just be a generic kind of message.
Gotcha. Can we predict consumer behavior from personality?
That is a tough one. There's a lot of divisions in the field about that, whether there is even such a thing as personality, because our personalities tend to change in different situations. What I was saying earlier about social identities. So, the truth is that there have been a lot of efforts to segment consumers based on personality. For example, are you introverted or extroverted? Most of those efforts have not been that successful, to be honest with you, because there's just too much variation to make it viable. But again, this recognition that we do change our personalities as we move from identity to identity. As a student sitting in my class very quietly and politely, perhaps, is very different than that same student on a Saturday night at a party. And so what we're seeing is that some companies are starting to think less in terms of, say, personality, but more in terms of situational segmentation. For example, snack food companies, some of the large snack food companies that I'm aware of are reorganizing their marketing department to be focused on the situation in which a snack food or a candy or something like that is being consumed. Is it at an athletic event? Is it at a party or a celebration of some kind? Is it at the workplace? And each of those identities requires different messaging and just an entirely different mindset. So personality per se, I'm not saying that there's no impact, but it's probably more productive to focus on situations that cause many of us, regardless of our personalities, and we are all different, but when we're in certain situations, we tend to tailor our behavior around that. So even if you're a very outgoing, bubbly, extroverted person, let's say you're visiting a cathedral somewhere in Europe as a tourist, even the most outgoing person, except for maybe a few obnoxious tourists, are going to be very calm and respectful in that kind of environment. But then if they go to, say, a carnival or a festival of some kind, the cues in that environment are going to tell them that it's okay to be much more outgoing and bubbly.
Right. And that's very interesting. I mean, if you say that we need more automation, but it needs to be more personalized in terms of the messaging. So would you use situations rather than personality type to tailor the experience?
Well, again, ideally, I would tailor the experience to each individual, which is a combination of personality and the situations that they're in. But if I had to choose one, I would say go for the situation and look for commonalities in terms of how people behave in that situation. But generally, what you want to do, to the extent that you can, and by the way, entrepreneurs have a leg up on this, ironically, sometimes, not due to automation, but because they're smaller, they tend to know their customers more intimately, and it's easier for them to actually tailor the experience to each individual customer. So ironically, one of the advantages of being an entrepreneur is that you are not big like the big guys. It's, with the big guys, it's like turning a battleship in order to keep up with consumer changes. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're able to pivot very quickly to take advantage of changes in situations and so on.
Yeah, that can definitely be an advantage. Although it sounds like we have a lot of tedious work ahead to get all those customized messages out there. Now, I'm curious, with all that you have achieved so far, what is next for you? What are you excited about in your life and business right now?
Well, I've been teaching for about 40 years, and I'm looking forward to actually doing a little less writing and a little more teaching now that I don't have the pressure to publish or anything like that, because I'm lucky enough to be a tenured professor. And so, the kids today that I'm seeing in my classroom are very, very different than they were 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that. I mentioned this online course that I just launched recently. I'm going to be spending a lot of time promoting that course because I do think that customer engagement is a huge issue today. And so, looking forward to maybe writing another book or two, and then who knows, sailing off into the sunset one of these days.
That sounds great. Where can people check out that course you mentioned?
Well, there's a link to it on my website, which is michaelsolomon.com. And you'll see a link if you scroll down there on that first page. The course is called Engage, how to turn your bored customers into brand fanatics. But if anybody wants to contact me, it's just michael@michaelsolomon.com.
Perfect. Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing your tips and your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you. It was fun, and you asked some great questions.
Thank you. Take care and talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, please take a sec to rate and review my show or share it with a friend. That way you can support the show and help me reach and support other entrepreneurs like yourself as well. If you would like my help to figure out how you can go from overwhelmed and overworked hustler to empowered and confident leader, check out my website at www.wiredforsuccess.solutions and book a free 20-minute strategy session with me. Can't wait to help you get wired for success. Until next time, take care. Bye.